Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology podcast series, where we spotlight diverse perspectives and insights within the field of otolaryngology. I'm your host, Rahul Shah. Let's jump into it. Welcome to Voices of Otolaryngology. My name's Rahul Shah. I'm your host. As I said, some days we just get lucky. You all know that? Today, we're very lucky to have Craig Dell with us. Merrill is a Bank of America company. For full disclosure, Bank of America and Merrill help us as advisors of the investment portfolio of the Academy. We've started working with them, I'd say about 6 months ago, and it's not Craig Dell, it's a separate part of the team. Craig is on the advisory side and answered our call to say, how do we help educate our physicians about finances? Indeed, the young physician section and the section for resident fellows really wanted a framework to start thinking about finance for physicians. Craig, welcome. I'd love you to introduce yourself and let's get started educating our docs.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity, Dr. Shah. I've been in the industry since 1996, doing private banking, some high net worth lending. In 2009, I transitioned over to the wealth management area where I joined a team, grew my practice, really focusing on physicians, executives at hospitals, private practices, and just really making sure that everyone out there understands the importance of financial planning.
Well, thank you for making time for our Academy members. You have a lot of clients, yourself, Merrill, Bank of America, that are physicians, physician practices. This is not a commercial for them. You're going to educate us today. Why finance for physicians? Why are we unique?
Yeah, it's interesting because the easy answer is everyone should have financial planning. But physicians really are a unique subset, different than a lot of professions where due to extensive schooling, residency, the incomes and the higher incomes come later in life. And without a plan, what we've seen is, there's a lot of financial stress out there that doesn't need to be. And, the idea of starting early with a plan makes a huge difference.
I was struck, one of our young physicians, Craig, we define young physicians as those that are 7 years out. So they've finished their residency and fellowship and they're 7 years out. I heard the other day, one of them say, I'm in my mid to late 30s and I have $500,000 in debt. And in most of America, that's a beautiful house. I mean, talk to me a little bit about that. That might represent some of your clients. Where does that person even start?
Yeah. In debt being defined as a few different pieces, I think another unique piece of physicians is the school debt burden that's out there as well. And, starting early on, I think just the idea of making sure, where to focus your monthly budget. And, if a school debt is out there, understanding, where to tackle that and making sure at the same time you're still planning for the future. And the idea of planning in general is just really breaking down the personal goals that you have. And, it's easy for us to talk about what goals should be, but every person, if you're married, you have a partner, those goals need to be discussed and attacked that way. And, 500,000 in debt is an absolute large number for some. And you want to avoid being an ostrich, sticking your head in the sand and not, really focusing on how to pay that down or just paying that down and not saving for some of the goals. And I think that's where we try to focus people when we do planning.
Yeah, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about goal planning. I had a quote from one of my professors. This was in the early 2000s, and I want you to reflect on it. And he said, when I got my first paycheck as an attending or after fellowship, I was blown away. And he said, but now I still live paycheck to paycheck. And he was 20 years out. And there's a lot of things to read into that. One is maybe he was saving first. But his point was what he was teaching us as young students is you have to plan. Just because you have more money doesn't mean life gets easier. So let's go back to that person in their mid to late 30s. They have a $500,000 med school college debt. I mean, they're making good money. They're making a couple hundred thousands. It should all work out, right, Craig? They don't need their 401k. They don't need their savings. They'll catch up later. Maybe they'll catch up in their 40s or 50s.
Yeah. The idea that, even going back to residency and learning from the beginning to create a plan and being able to put away money early on and experience that compounding, which we can certainly talk about later, which is such a powerful.
No, go on it now. Go ahead. Talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think that first stage of being into residency, you're finally getting a little bit of income. It's certainly not going to be your high income, but at that point, building a strong foundation of creating a budget. If you have the opportunity to participate in a 401 or a 403 with the hospital, putting away money, even, tax deferred before taxes are paid, it's not going to be that big of a hit. But if you can get money in early, especially knowing income's coming later, getting money in your 20s, letting compounding happen, which compounding is when you put money in, your money gets reinvested. The growth just continually builds on each other. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that can be gained over a 30, 40-year period before you need the money for retirement. Incredibly important. And getting that foundation of a budget allows talking to a professional early on of, if figuring out that school debt or that 500,000 debt that you were talking about, what's the interest rate there, and determining, what's the likelihood of putting away money now, long term, getting a bigger benefit than knocking all the debt out early, and understanding the options. So there's a lot of moving pieces with that. But what I can say in doing this for 15 plus years, some of my clients who have the largest amount of wealth, it was simply due to them starting early, putting as much away early as they can, and letting compound just continue to take care of it and set them up for retirement.
So let me give you real numbers. So 22, 23, the average otolaryngologist probably finishes college. Let's say nowadays, a lot of them are taking a gap year. So 23, 24, then 4 years of med school, 28, and then 5 years of residency, so 33. So they come out in their mid to early 30s. You're saying, let's forget about what they could have done in their teens and 20s. Let's assume nothing was done. You're saying even in your mid 30s to start planning, because the fallacy is, you know what, I'll wait till I'm 50s when I'm making double my income. But you're saying, no, even a small bite early on is good. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely saying that. And, I think, again, I continually talk about that foundation. I see some of the pitfalls of that same, person that you put out there is, it's kind of the keeping up with the Jones sometimes mentality, where you are finally starting to make a little money. You've been working incredibly hard. Now you get that desire for a shiny toy, or maybe immediately wanting to buy a larger house. That's where sitting with a professional, having a plan, allows you to understand all those things are important. A shiny toy is very aspirational, keeps you working hard, but understand the buckets of money and understand, where you should focus on. Because if you are able, even though it might not feel great, to put away money early, the idea of that longer term retirement goal, freeing up money for the larger house, the toys later on, that happens because you started early.
I think in my prior job, Bank of America and Merrill were assisting the organization with the medical staff. And I know you've spoken to them a lot. And the statistic across healthcare, this is across healthcare, Craig, is astonishing. And I want you to reflect on it. I want the audience to fill in the blank. What % of physicians max out their 401k? Let's give a multiple choice, Craig. I'm going to have the audience do it. I don't want you to answer. Is it 100%, what it should be? Is it 75%, 50%, or 25%? I want the listeners to answer that. at a macro level, what percent of physicians max out their 401k? The answer is E, none of the above. It was like 18% or 17%. Craig, why? And I'm not telling you to say that to push them into their 401k, but I think that's what you're getting at. You're coming right out in your 30s, and I made that mistake. I didn't do it right on, Craig, early on. It's a fallacy that we all fall into.
Yeah, and it really is. And I think the idea is, again, going back to how hard physicians have worked to get to where they're at, and wanting to feel, that, all right, finally I can spend some money. Doesn't mean you can't, but the ability to put away money, even if you're doing it before taxes, you're not going to feel it as much as I think people are afraid they will coming out of their paychecks. And that's where I go back to, be very upfront about what's important to you. It's, I can use a doctor analogy. If I go to see a doctor and I'm there wanting the professional to give me advice, if I lie about how many drinks I have a week, what are my eating habits, that's not going to do what's best for me. I need to be upfront and say, I do enjoy a glass of wine, or, I do want, to still be able to do this. That's what planning does, understand, be very upfront and say, I do want to travel now. I do want to have a nice house for my family. But retiring is important. And that's where, when you look at planning, that's where a professional can help focus those so you can accomplish all those and understand that early importance, even at, a conservative return, putting away that money for long term, focusing on some intermediate term, focusing on some shorter term pieces. I think people just don't understand it's possible. They're just afraid to have to commit to that. Maybe similar to, afraid to have to commit to a diet. If it's done properly, long-term success can be there, for both.
And we mentioned Bank of America and Merrill. I'm agnostic to where you get your advice. Many 401ks, many employed physicians, many practices have different plans. And usually those plans do have an advisor that you can just pick up the phone and get it. So when you say professional, I'm just going to say for you, you're not saying you're the end all and be all, always go to Craig Dell. Your point is just reach out, whether it's through your 401k or even your bank, just talk to somebody. What are the buckets, Craig? You mentioned early on the buckets. I'm a bit confused. Our physicians are confused. There's the investing bucket, but you said there's other buckets where a dollar should go. Let's say you make $1 every 2 weeks. How do you think about those buckets for young physicians, those less than 10 years out, Craig?
I love it. And again, when I meet with individuals, and again, if they have a partner, I think it's incredibly important for both of you to be there. But it's a conversation to start. It's, what's most important to you. And again, I want to know what's important short term, what's important intermediate. And if we say long term would be something like retirement. If a short term goal is, especially talking about that younger physician, I want to buy a house at some point. We would put that in the shorter term bucket. Intermediate would be, I maybe have a small family and we want to do some education planning. The different buckets help set a risk level to the dollars that you have. So everyone knows about an employer plan, putting away money in a 401, a 403, maybe even a 457, which we can dive into later. But when we're talking about short-term monies, and this comes from your paycheck, and maybe you have it in a savings account, or maybe you've opened up a brokerage account. If I have someone that wants to purchase a home in the next 6 to 24 months, I want to make sure that money is there for them. So inside of that bucket, we're going to look at what would be determined conservative opportunities. If there's cash, CDs, maybe some treasury bonds to guarantee that bucket of money although might not grow substantially, grows enough, but most importantly is there for them. And as you spread out the time for each of your goals, that's where maybe the risk level, and we can talk about that later, but the risk level increases a little bit, all guided by an investment time frame for those buckets and understanding all aspects. And that's where being upfront about what's important to you and putting everything out there, all the different goals that, a physician or a family might have and how to attack those.
I've heard this from my friends, my peers, not once, not twice, but I hear it often, Craig. I'm getting called into the hospital at 3 a.m. When I come back into my driveway, I want to be in a reasonable car and enter a reasonable house. I'm sure you've heard that because you're smirking a bit there. Yeah. I think from what you're saying, they could have it all. You could do the 401k. You could reasonably buy that ride that you want, but your point is just saying, think about those buckets and goals. You're not saying no. You're saying there's a way to get there.
Absolutely. And that's where kind of I use that analogy of going to a doctor. Be very upfront. It only allows the person, whether it's myself or you doing planning yourself, to be able to help. So if it isn't important for a nicer car or guaranteed nice vacation once a year, I feel like that's incredibly important based on how hard you work. You just talked about, someone going in at 3 a.m. In order to do that, you need aspirational, reasons to want to do that. And, the way we look at planning, it's what are your essential goals, your important goals, your aspirational goals. I think most people have essential as retirement, but I want to hear about those aspirationals, a second home, because that way then working together can understand how to accomplish that, where your buckets of money should go, understanding what budgets you have, and, really talking through what's important. So then the roadmap can be created to understand how to accomplish those. And absolutely in all different incomes, those things can happen. And, most importantly, within the time frame that you're looking for.
Let me be upfront and honest and admit one of my mistakes. And can you tell me if you see this mistake for physicians? We're a 2-physician family. We were training in Boston. And I didn't contribute to the 401. We both didn't, because we said, we're just getting started as residents. It's a lot of money. We shouldn't do it. It wasn't until our mid-30s that we started doing it. And that was my dad that gave the advice. And he said, don't worry about it. You'll make it up as a doctor. And I lost probably a decade of the 401k compounding. And I'm super mad about this to this day. Do you see that happening? So basically, I'm asking you, why should they start early? Why should the residents and those in their late 20s, even if it's $50 a paycheck, even if it's $20, the compounding now, I've lost that time, Craig.
Yeah. And I would say what I found interesting and again, more unique within physicians is I do believe physicians in their mind have the fallback that I'm willing to work into my 70s, working, I'll catch up with later. It's not a problem. What I tend to find out is when I talk to some of, let's say, the older physicians, the mid 60s, that although they're willing to work, I think they're, a little disappointed they didn't save more earlier, because working into your 70s, again, going back to something unique with physicians is, later in life, being able to have passion projects, do consulting, things like that maybe free you up. So you're still working into your 70s, but not because you have to. So that's where the focus of putting away, as you said, $50, $100, growing, compounding on itself. Look, I'm not going to talk about what expectations are in the markets, I can only look historically at what the markets have done. And you could look at any time period, whether 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year period. And the longer you are in the markets, the better you're going to do. And, I still firmly believe that to be the case. And so putting away that money, closing your eyes to it, letting it do its thing, it will absolutely get you to where you need to be, and then give you the flexibility of determining in your 60s whether, you want to fully retire at that point, or again, move on to consultant, or doing some type of passion work.
All right, let's do a fast math test. I'm going to do all the speaking, so if it's wrong, you don't get in trouble. And if we get it wrong, our members can help us. So let's take the rule of 70. The rule of 70 looks at population doublings, and let's assume a rate of return of 7%. So the rule of 70 divided by 7% is 10 years. So if you put X amount of dollars, let's say you put $1,000 today, in 10 years, that's 2,000. Okay. Assuming roughly it's the rule of 72, but it's the rule of 70 divided by the percent. 7% is 10 years. I'm doing all the math, Craig, but I want to drive this home.
You're doing well.
So, yeah. $2,500 in year one. Okay. Let's assume somebody does that over 10 years. Then after that time, no rate of return, they have 25,000. You double that, becomes 50,000. You double that, becomes 100,000. You double that, it becomes 200,000. You double that, it becomes 400,000. You double it. That's 5 decades. And what I learned was
all starting with that thumb, which was a very small amount, inside of what your budget is. That's absolutely a big part of it. And, the idea that, there's different ways to save. I get a lot of questions when I do financial planning with high income earners, and they're like, I pay too much in taxes. You just went back and gave us that stat about how many people participate in the 401 plans. Look, you max out your 401, that not only puts money in before you pay taxes on it, it grows tax deferred, but that takes money off of the amount that you have to pay taxes on at a very high level. Some hospitals even offer a 457. And I know I was in one institution where we do financial planning, and 7% of the population that could put money into an extra plan weren't participating, weren't taking advantage of that. And then I would talk to them about planning, and they would complain about taxes or, ways to put away money. So part of going through a financial plan, especially with someone who understands what your benefits are, is really making sure that you're doing the most that you can with inside of your budget, which could have the effects of helping, to be as tax efficient as possible, to accomplish all of those goals of compounding on top of everything that we've discussed.
Yeah, that's why I'm very frustrated. In my late 20s, early 30s, we didn't put that $100 a paycheck, because it would have been 2,500 over 10 years, would have been $1 million in our 80s. Right. All right, so now I'm a young physician. I'm a resident. You had me at hello, Mr. Dell. I'm ready to go. I'm going to get off this call and go buy me some NVIDIA, go buy some Google, go buy some Microsoft. I'm going to just do it all. My favorite person is Harry Markowitz, who won a Nobel Prize in economics. Can you tell the group about Markowitz?
I love that you even know who that person is. So really, the modern portfolio theory is really what he's known for, but it's, he did work in the 50s that what I do today still really stems from everything that he's done. What he figured out very, mathematically, was the idea of, instead of maybe buying 1 or 2 companies and putting all your risk there, is, taking a look across the board at different asset classes and trying to develop a risk return model for an individual. And everyone is unique, again, with their goals, but understanding, a risk level, a standard deviation across a portfolio that's going to give you the type of return tiered towards what type of risk level you want to take, and make sure you're maximizing that. It's really where diversification came, which ultimately led to, what we've talked about, goals-based, really goals-based investing. So, I think everyone knows a little bit about it based on investing inside of their 401. You've got a limited menu, but there may be inside of that, there's diversification. But instead of doing it blindly, again, I know I'm saying talk to a professional. I think the same way doctors would, recommend people talk to professionals. I think that's the best way to do it. So I know I didn't answer directly your individual wants to
don't give me stock tips. You can't give me stock tips.
Right.
But my point was simply that it's not just all stocks. And if somebody says, wow, Mr. Dell, I'm so excited, I'm going to go park it in my bank account. It's those extremes that I want you to reflect on, that it's kind of a blend. It's asset allocation and diversification. It's not just one and done, or it's not binary.
No. And I feel like I'm on repeat when I say, understanding what your goals are. But for me, when I work with someone, I don't even think about how I'm going to recommend investments to them until I understand every aspect of their life. And, the NVIDIA is absolutely, might be perfect for a portion of money for a period of time for that person. For a resident, I would first and foremost, number one thing is putting away money. That's where you start is, okay, how much can I put away? And then from there, understanding what vehicle. Some questions that I've gotten from residents is, I do have the opportunity to put money into a 401, but I might not be there long enough to have the matching contribution vest. That's okay. Any money that you put in is money that will stay inside of a 401. You've got the control over it over a period of time. So, again, that's where building that budget and being able to start to put away money, is really the most important piece.
This is a complex question. Let me try to say it. Just as we talked about the rule of 72 and doubling, taxes and inflation can completely erode. So you can't say it, but I can say it. Let's say we look historically back at the S&P index, 9 to 11%, something like that, historically over 50, 60 years. But the reason 401ks are important is tax savings. It grows, it compounds. And then the reason diversification is important is you want to stay ahead of inflation. That's a loaded question, but can you just educate our audience about some of those and how you think about the erosion of taxes and inflation on savings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've really appreciated over the, let's say the last 10 years, I think it's become a little more relevant, is inside of employer plans, 401s, 403s, the opportunity for the individual to decide, hey, I can put away money tax deferred before I pay taxes. That money then grows tax deferred, but at some point the IRS, the government, wants their money. So in retirement, when you go to pull that money out, you're going to have to pay taxes on it at that point. The idea is, without a crystal ball of, what are going to be, the tax rates at the time of your retirement, is they're probably going to be less than at your highest income. Right now, there's a lot more opportunities, where you can also decide that, hey, instead of putting money away tax deferred, I can rip the Band-Aid, pay taxes on it now, and move it into a Roth inside of a 401, again, 403, if that's an opportunity for you. When you do that, you've ripped the Band-Aid now, you've paid taxes. That money is going to grow, not tax deferred, but tax free. So in retirement, past 59 and a half, you can pull the money out at that point and not have to pay any taxes on there. So, it's more individualized, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But that would certainly be a discussion point, based on, really where you are within your budget. My number one goal is to put as much money away as you can. So when I think of younger residents, if possible, I tell them, look, do the tax deferred spot. That way you can put as much money away as you can, because it's really that although you're putting away money, it's coming out of your paycheck before tax. It doesn't feel as bad. So that's my high recommendation without talking to anyone.
Yeah.
Diversification's another point I can dive into, but I think, first and foremost, start with, if possible, getting as close as you can to maxing out the 401, the employer plans. Don't stop at what the matching contribution is. I say that's a mistake that, when I talk to a lot of individuals, I get where, they're saying, oh yeah, I am maxing it out. The hospital's giving me 5%. I'm putting 5% in, not understanding that you can put much more into it, and that's, the 5% match is great. I absolutely get to that as a bare minimum. That's, without doing that, you're leaving free money out there. But that shouldn't be the goal. And, I think unfortunately a lot of physicians don't do more than that, even though they possibly could. And, if you can put away money inside of the plan, again, for retirement, that's great. You mentioned taxes. There's the opportunity, if your paycheck allows, to start saving outside of retirement plans. And again, that's with savings accounts. That's with brokerage accounts. Whether you're doing it self-directed or you're doing it working with a professional, that money, we talked about different buckets, could be money for retirement. More than likely early on, it's money for those other goals. And making sure you're being as tax efficient along the way can really help out. If you are doing stocks and bonds, making sure each year where possible, you're looking at gains and losses, to possibly offset each other. So you're not too surprised at the end, if you are looking to buy a house 5 years from now, you've purchased investments that have large gains. You're really excited, but then realize, oh no, I've got to pay taxes on this. And even long-term taxes could take away 20% of your savings. So, there's a lot of avenues we could go down, but, taxes are a huge part of investing in general. And I think a lot of times that's forgotten.
Well, thank you for that. 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap up. And we had talked about a webinar series for our members that will get started maybe quarterly with you, Craig. I know you've done that with medical staffs and other practices, and that might be a nice way for folks to interact and learn from you all. So two final questions. One is, here's a quote: "Not all debt is bad." Can you talk about that? I mean, let's go back to this mid-30s-year-old female physician with $500,000 in med school debt. Somebody could say, pay off all your debt, pay. But if that's at 6% versus she's got some credit card debt at 28%, just talk a little bit about, I know you can't give guidance, but just not all debt is bad. And then I'll have a final question for you.
Great. And I would say I think people are understanding that, which has caused a little bit of a clog inside of the housing market. There's absolutely different types of debt along the way. I mean, and it's not just interest rate driven. There's credit card debt, and credit card rates are extremely high. There's student loan debt that, might have a lower interest rate, but different factors go into that. There's auto loans, and then mortgages. Mortgages, it's interesting. Over the time period, you talk to, our parents, grandparents, they had 18% mortgage rates. They think, a 6% mortgage is, you couldn't be luckier. What they sometimes forget to tell you is they were getting, 14% in their savings account. So, it's a little little, not the full story being told. Mortgage debt, and if I talk about having a home, that would go as an asset class. That's real estate, whether you bought the home to, have as strictly as an asset that's going to gain. Debt is different across the board as we're talking about. So unfortunately, we've got, a lot of folks that have 2.5%, 3.5% mortgage rates when the current rate might be 6%, which is causing them to, decide that, hey, I'm not ready to move. I've got this debt. I understand it's a good debt. If I'm looking to invest money right now, it's a pretty low bar historically to get higher than that. And, I have those conversations of, look, we can do CDs, bonds that will get you more than what that debt is. Let's not quite be in a rush to pay it off. Whereas 6% rates right now, again, historically low and pretty average. It's easy again for our grandparents to say that, but over, the 10, 15 years, it is higher. House prices have gone higher. So if you do have a 6% mortgage rate, there's options out there. Maybe rates will come down. We know that's, what our leaders are looking to do now. But it's also hey, trying to figure out, if I am long-term investing, where should that money go? And opportunities to say, let's make that minimum payment, but maybe not rush to pay that debt off because we know there's going to be an opportunity later to refinance, or maybe we're going to move in 3 years and it's more important to add money towards the goals we've discussed. So everyone's unique in there, but mortgages are, I think, the biggest factor of have a discussion, understand what the opportunities are, for future possible refinances, or invest into to hedge and possibly get a higher return.
Perfect. Well, last question. We often ask this in performance improvement. Don Berwick, who founded the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, was a CMS administrator, implores us to always ask, what will we do by next Tuesday? So today is actually Tuesday, I think. Yeah. So folks that are listening to this, whenever they're listening to it, what advice do you give? And let's really focus on those young physicians that are less than 7 years out and the residents. Give them a few things that they can easily do or start thinking about. How about I give you the easy ones? Oh, you say it, Craig. All right, it's your show. You say, what are the easy ones?
I mean, we might have different opinions about what's easy. For me, it may not be the absolute easiest, but understand first and foremost what's available to you. Again, I mentioned I do a lot of financial wellness programs at different hospitals. HR groups are great, but not everybody pays attention with information that comes to them. First and foremost, understand what opportunities are out there.
Let's just, number one, understand what
your options are, what your benefits are. Yes.
Awesome. I just want to make it absolutely concrete. Yeah. That's the first thing. Give me more. I can do that by Tuesday. Give me one or two more.
Yeah. Take a look, make a budget. You could Google ChatGPT, go out there, find the best line item budget, put everything down, be honest with yourself. You put all, how many times you've DoorDashed that week, put everything down there and understand what extra money is out there. Once you've determined what extra money is out there, then determine the next step of, where do I want to put that money? Do I want to put it towards retirement longer term? Do I want to put it in a bucket that instead of going out and getting a car tomorrow that I'm going to have a high interest rate on, maybe I put it away in account, let it grow until it gets to a point where I could possibly pay it all off or allow myself other opportunities. So,
So understand what opportunities are available to you. Make a budget. Now I'm getting busy because now you're giving me a lot to do. Anything else by next Tuesday? I think, how about I say this? Just save. Just do it.
Yep.
I think you said that earlier. It's pretty simple. If you're not doing it for the 401k or something that, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said just start.
Yeah, just start and figure out, even if it's a small amount, if you set up to increase a small amount on a monthly basis, I feel very confident you're not going to notice it in coming out of your paycheck. So make that your takeaway.
Craig, thank you. Thank you. I know you speak to physician groups all the time. We're thrilled that you recorded this podcast with us. And I know we're going to be starting a webinar series where we call it Wellness for Our Physicians. Much gratitude to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. I enjoyed it.
We hope today's episode sparked some fresh ideas. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with friends. Have thoughts or suggestions? Use the feedback form in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow us on social media for highlights, behind-the-scenes content, and updates. Thanks for listening. See you next time.